So, my name is Simon. As Justin said, I'm a youth pastor in the Chicago area, and I'm really glad to be here with you this morning. So we've all been in a situation similar to this. You were part of a people group, whether that was a friend group, a work group, a sports team, and you grew accustomed to the way that things were done. You grew into a pattern. And then a new person showed up, they said something or did something that was totally not cool for that friend group. Maybe you're a boss, and you just recently hired somebody. They show up, and on the first week, they're trying to teach you how to do your job. And you say, who is this person that walks in here and says that? Who is this person? Maybe you're part of a friend group, and someone showed up into your friend group, and they made a joke that was like not okay for that friend group. And you thought, who is this person walking in here and saying that? Even though I grew up here, I'm kind of new here. Maybe I say something during this sermon, and you think, who is this man saying that? Maybe. For me, it was my sports team. So as Justin said, I played college football at Trinity way back in the day when I was in college about a month ago. And every single year, the same thing happened. There was a freshman that came in, and they would make the most ridiculous claims. They would walk in and say, hey, you senior who's had the job for 2 years, I'm going to start over you. Not just that, I'm going to be a freshman All-American. And the older guys on the team were like, who is this man? They ended up riding the bench the whole year. That's what happens. Who is this man? That's what we've all asked. And maybe that's more of a negative example. Maybe there's a positive one. So I went to Mona Shores High School, and if you've been around the area for a while, you know this. If you're new, I'll clue you in. Mona Shores football was the laughingstock of Muskegon County for a long time. For 50 years straight, we had a football team and never once made the playoffs. It was like a joke. In fact, when I was in middle school, there was a vote to shut down the football program. However, the vote did not pass because the marching band still needed a place to perform. However, as my grade was growing up, we were in middle school, we were in 8th grade, and we got invited to this high school junior varsity 7-on-7 tournament. It's kind of like football, but there's only passing and there's 7 people. And we actually beat some of these high school junior varsity teams. It was largely in part due to our quarterback. He was like really good. When people watched him play football, they would ask, who is this man? Is he the one that has come to save Mona Shores football? Is he the one that has come to conquer Muskegon County football? We've all asked this question about who is this person. And maybe the most important person to ever ask this about is the man Jesus of Nazareth. Maybe you're here this morning and you're not a believer, you're not a Christian. You found church somehow, I don't know how, but you're here. He's a real person. Maybe you've been a Christian your whole life and you've been confused about exactly what our faith is and who it's in. It's in a person. It's in the person of Jesus. Maybe you've thought Christianity for years was about some guy in the sky with a whole list of rules. And if you believe in that guy in the sky, you're a Christian. If you don't, you're not. It's actually less about a guy in the sky and more about a person on the earth. If you are not a Christian, maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe you hate Christians, maybe you don't. Here's a quote that I think we can all find common ground on. So there's a guy, Bart Ehrman, so he's a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina. He's an atheist agnostic, meaning atheist, he doesn't believe that there's a God. Agnostic, meaning even if there is, he's not knowable. You can't know a higher power. So here's a quote of what Bart has to say. I think the evidence is just so overwhelming that Jesus existed that it's silly to talk about him not existing. I don't know anyone who's a responsible historian who is actually trained in the historical method or anybody who is a biblical scholar who does this for a living, who gives any credence at all to any of this. And so if we were having a conversation, I'd be way nicer than he is. He kind of is trying to make you feel silly. He literally said it. But I would say it nicer. But the fact of the matter is that Jesus of Nazareth was a real man who really walked this planet. So the question is not if Jesus was. The question is who Jesus was. Who is this man that walked the planet? Bart, he agrees that Jesus existed, but he comes to a different conclusion on who he says that Jesus is. Because if he came to the same conclusion, he would be a Christian. Yes. And so that proves the point that our faith is not just in a set of practices. Our faith is not just in a set of beliefs. It's not just a set of doctrines. It's not even just a set of morality. Our faith is in a person. If you have doubts and if you've walked away from the Christian faith, you've walked away from a person. Not just some random guy in the sky who has a list of rules, but a person who walked this planet. His name is Jesus. So if you've been around Olivet lately, I haven't, but if you have, we've been through the series in Hebrews, just recently talking about this idea of faith. The author of Hebrews defines faith by saying, now faith is being sure of what we hoped for and certain of what we do not see. We know Jesus to be a real man, but we don't physically see him. So how can we know who he is? We know that he is, but we don't know who he is. To find out who a person is, it's often best to talk to someone who's really close to that person, maybe a really close friend. Peter was one of Jesus' closest friends. He spent a ton of time with Jesus. They did everything together. Peter was all over the place with Jesus. In fact, when Jesus was ready to leave, he handed the keys of the kingdom to Peter. Jesus said, you see this gathering of people I've started? I'm going to leave and I'm going to set you in charge. Here's the keys to the kingdom. That's how close they were. And so Peter knew who Jesus was. Peter wanted other people to know who Jesus was too. And so he wanted to get it in writing, a document, a manuscript, that other people who weren't eyewitnesses, the people in Rome at that time, but people like you and people like me, who weren't eyewitnesses, to be able to know who Jesus is. So we're going to look at two events in the life of Jesus. They're recorded what we know as the book of Mark. It's the book of Mark because Peter was a fisherman, likely illiterate, so he had to tag team this with someone who was educated. So he tag teamed it with John Mark, so that way they could get this down in writing so people who were not eyewitnesses could know who Jesus is. So as we dive into this, don't look at it as just a dusty old book. Look at it as a real-life person telling you these events when they were eyewitness of it. So let's dive into the book of Mark. Chapter 7, verses 24 through 37 is what we're going to be in today. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. Why would Jesus want to go in a house and not have anyone know it? I think he was pretty tired out. I'll fill you in on a couple events that happened right before this in the book of Mark. So first of all, Jesus feeds 5,000 people with very little food. If you're a parent in the room and you've ever had your kids over with all their friends, that's exhausting, okay? He was probably pretty tired from that. Number 2, he walked on water. I personally have never done it, but I'm assuming it's a calf workout, so he was probably pretty tired from that as well. And number 3, he went toe-to-toe with the religious leaders of his day. These people were called the Pharisees, and they made up extra rules, extra rituals, more than there ever was supposed to be. And if you were someone who didn't adhere to their laws, adhere to their rules, you would have been known as an untouchable. And Jesus was not okay with that. And so they were arguing, they were fighting, and so Jesus just got done fighting with the religious leaders of his day. All that to be said, he's pretty tired out. So he wanted to go to a house where he could be alone, just him and his disciples. Why in Tyre? That's up north. So Jesus' home base was more south in like Galilee region, and he went up north to Tyre, so this was outside of his home base. So there would have been this people group called Gentiles there. So if you don't know what that means, it's anyone who's non-Jewish. They would be a Gentile, and they would have been seen as the untouchables. And so that's where Jesus was. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. Notice that the writer Mark does not just say a person. He says a woman. He's indicating something. In this time period, the women would not have been respected as well as the men. And so Mark is indicating this is someone who was a first level of untouchable. Notice also that she came based off what she had heard. She heard about Jesus and she came. She did not know every single answer to every single question that putting her faith in Jesus would entail. She didn't know Jesus' stance on every single political issue. She just came. She didn't know if she could keep that side habit that she has if she came to Jesus. She just came. She came, she heard about him, she came, and she fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek. Ding, 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 another indicator as to who this person was. Not just a person, but a woman. Not just a woman, but a Greek. Greek and Gentile meaning the same thing. So this person was now the second level of untouchable. And Mark goes on. Born in Syrian Phoenicia. Wow, he is hitting us over the head with how clear he's making it who this person is. Not just a person, a woman. Not just a woman, a Greek woman. And to add to that, a Syro-Phoenician. What you need to know about that people group is they were labeled 5 times in the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures that they would have adhered to, 5 times as godless oppressors of God's people. So this people group would have been looked at as an enemy. Remember enemy, it's going to come back later. 3rd level of untouchable. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. She showed up and she was humble. She didn't show up like the religious leaders of the day. They would show up and say, if you're so cool, prove it to us. If you're so great, do something awesome. She came humbly and she begged. And Jesus said, first let the children eat all they want, he told her. For it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs? Did Jesus just call this woman a dog? That's not cool, right? Like, that doesn't seem nice. In my study, I tried really, really hard to justify what Jesus was saying. Like, I tried to find every single possible way that this wouldn't be offensive. I tried to figure out if the original spelling was D-A-W-G, like, what's up, my dog? It wasn't. Needless to say, every single time period you're in, every single people group, it's actually not cool to call a woman a dog. Why was Jesus saying this? That doesn't fit into our little nice boy persona of Jesus. Why is he saying that? Let's keep reading to find out. Yes, Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. If I was her, I would have been indignant. I would not have been that humble. She has a problem in her life. Her daughter is not healthy. She came to Jesus. She was humble. She begged, and he called her a dog. That's not cool. And she responded humbly. Is that our response when we come to Jesus? Or do we sometimes really want just something really cool to happen? I don't know if you're like me, but if you've gone through doubts, you've really wanted God to prove himself. If you've been in a struggling situation, you really want God to prove himself. I've prayed prayers literally exactly like this. God, if you're up there, like if you're some guy in the sky, can you just like throw me down a pizza or something? Like, I just want to know that you're real. And so that's kind of a funny example. But maybe we've prayed prayers like, God, if you're real and if you're out there, can you get rid of my boss that's really mean? Give me a promotion. God, if you're really out there, make my kids get better grades. Maybe if you're a student and you've prayed, God, if you're out there, can you make my parents stop being so mean to me? Some of these are funny examples, but the bottom line is we want God to prove himself when we're going through hard times. And we don't come humbly, we come like, you better show me something. Maybe we can take a cue from this woman. She comes humbly. And of course, because of her humble reply, Jesus would heal the daughter right away, right? But then he told her, for such a reply, you may go. It's debated on the exact phrasing of this, but some would say the reply was almost like, you gave an answer, run along now, bye-bye, shoo-shoo, be gone. He's very stern and harsh here. Why could he have been saying that? This doesn't make sense. To recap, Jesus, the most people person ever, is going way up north to be in a house by himself and just his disciples. A woman comes humbly and begs, and he calls her a dog, which we learned is not cool. She gives a humble reply, and he says, be gone. What are we missing? Like, what are we not understanding? Because this isn't falling in what I've thought Jesus to be like. What are we missing? I think it's important to understand the audience that would have been in the room. So if you think about it, we have the Jewish disciples, and then we have the Gentiles with this woman. If you've ever seen a movie where there was a little kid bully, all right, and so the bully would be up front, and then there would be that little line of like, whoa, I'm really sorry about that, guys. So the line of people behind the bully, they would like jump and piggyback on what the bully said. So the bully would say something like, you're weird. And the person behind would be like, yeah, you tell him. They would jump on the piggyback of the bully. And maybe Jesus' disciples were possibly getting that image. Maybe they thought this was what was going on. Like Jesus called her a dog, and the disciples are like, finally, you're giving something to somebody, you're giving something to the person who deserves it. This whole time, Jesus, you've been way too nice to women. You've been way too nice to children. You're finally giving somebody something they deserve. They would have been into it. I imagine the Gentiles in the room very upset. You come into our territory and talk to us like this and treat us like this. Who is this man that thinks he can come in here and say that? But what Jesus says next changes everything. For the demon has left your daughter. Every jaw dropped. The disciples are saying, do you remember what you just said? You just called that woman a dog. You know she doesn't deserve it. She's an enemy. Why would you do this for this woman? She's an enemy. I imagine maybe the Gentiles thought it was too good to be true. So she went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. The Gentiles would have been celebrating. They would have been joyous. They would have said, who is this man that can heal this woman's daughter without even being there? Mixed emotions across the board. Upset, confused disciples, overwhelmed and joyous Gentiles. Mixed emotions everywhere, but one thing remains consistent. Every single person is asking the question, who is this man? We want to know who this man is. Why was Jesus doing all this? Maybe it was to prove a point. Maybe it was to expose the disciples' hearts. Maybe it was to expose our hearts. Maybe it was there to expose your heart. You see, we oftentimes, like the disciples, think of other people as untouchables. Maybe your neighbors who are always doing stuff that you don't like and you don't want to deal with them. Maybe people around us in Muskegon County, maybe someone that doesn't have the same financial status as you, and that person's an untouchable. Maybe Jesus was getting the disciples so riled up, so into it, to at the last second say, are you kidding me? You think she's untouchable? Do you not know your own hearts, what you were just thinking about this woman? You see, Jesus, by healing this woman's daughter, he was identifying with her. Someone who would have been known as an untouchable, Jesus was saying, hey, this is someone who I'm on board with. In fact, she came and she requested something, and Jesus fulfilled that request. He was serving her. Who is this man? Jesus is the servant of the so-called untouchables. Jesus was making the point so extremely clear. He's saying, No, there's not a special person. Are you serious? You guys thought that? He's saying the good news of God is for all people, no matter who you are. He's making the point, if you want to follow me, if you are a Jesus follower, if you claim to be a Christian, and how you're practicing Christianity is preventing you from loving and serving the people who you don't like or who aren't like you, you have the wrong kind. He's saying if your version of how you practice Christianity is preventing you from loving and serving people of a different political party than you, you have the wrong kind. He's saying if your version of Christianity is preventing you from loving and serving someone as a different financial status than you have the wrong kind. If how you're following Jesus is preventing you from loving and serving someone from the LGBTQ community, you have the wrong kind. If your version of Christianity is preventing you from loving and serving a human being, you have the wrong kind. Who is this man? He's the servant of the so-called untouchable. Peter and Mark, when they tag teamed this, they included this for a reason, because it left an impact on Peter's heart. I imagine after the dust settles, after the Gentiles have left, it's just Jesus and his disciples in the room, sitting around. You look over John and Matthew, confused, they're whispering, what did Jesus just do? You look over at Peter, he's scratching his head, and Jesus kicks back and he says, you thought she was untouchable. Come on. Jesus is the servant of the so-called untouchable. And so because this left an impact on Peter's heart, he put this together with another event in the gospel where Jesus was dealing with an untouchable. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis, or known as the 10 towns. The geography of this is a little confusing. He was up here, went down here. But he had a purpose. He was still in territory of mixed people, Jews and Gentiles together. There are some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk. They begged Jesus to place his hand on him. And he took him aside, away from the crowd. Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephphatha, which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. So, why did Jesus take this man to the side? If he's the supposed Son of God, if he's the supposed Savior, wouldn't he do it in front of everyone so they could see his power and see his goodness? Why did he have to do what seemingly are magical rituals? It seemed almost like I have to do this, abracadabra, voila, he's healed. Why did Jesus do this? Did he have to take the person aside? Did he have to do the rituals? I think not. He just healed the woman's daughter without even being there. He could have healed this man just by saying it. This man maybe had been made a spectacle out of his whole life. You see, he was deaf and could hardly talk. So imagine you're the little boy on the playground at the school, and they're like, you can't come learn with us. You're deaf and can't talk. They wouldn't have had access to the same education. He maybe was made fun of. And so instead of making a spectacle out of him again, Jesus took him to the side. Jesus took him one-on-one, individual connection. And then Jesus spoke like a physical, tangible form of sign language to this man. He could have just said it. The guy wouldn't have heard it. He spoke in a way that the guy could understand. You see, Jesus has revealed himself to the entire world. But I believe he also wants to reveal himself to you individually in a way that you can understand. And so the man was healed, but Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. That can be confusing. I think it's probably because the more that people knew what Jesus was doing, the more they understand who he was, the more the religious leaders wanted to kill him. And so he's saying, hey guys, not ready for that yet. I still have more good work to do. But the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. Maybe it was Jesus' sense of humor. He knew full well people were going to talk about it, but he was like, hey guys, don't talk about it. Knowing full well they were going to talk about it. So the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Everything he does is awesome. Who is this man? He can heal the deaf and the mute. He serves the so-called untouchable. Who is this man? You see, Mark and Peter, when they were writing this, they would have known that people would be asking the question at this point. And Mark gives us a very clear indicator as to who this man is. And he does it with his word choice. The word that he uses for deaf and could hardly talk was a very, very rare word choice. The only reason he could have been using it was to point us to something else. In fact, it's only used one other time in the entire Bible, and that's found in Isaiah 35. And so Isaiah is known as a prophet, is what that's called. So he wrote foretelling the future, and he wrote this hundreds of years before the life of Jesus. Let's see what the prophet Isaiah says. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance. He will come with divine retribution or punishment. He will come to save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Mark is saying this is not just another man. This is not just another miracle worker. This is God in a human body come down from heaven to save you. But he comes with vengeance. He comes with divine retribution or punishment. Other translations say he came to destroy or crush your enemies. Can you think of anyone who is an enemy of God's people at this time? The Syrophoenicians? But it seems like Jesus didn't punish her. It seems like Jesus didn't destroy her. In fact, he served her? How does that make sense? The Jews were expecting when their God would come that he would destroy the enemies and that he would raise up the Jews. But he didn't do that. He didn't destroy the enemies. What could this mean? Mark knew this, Peter knew this, and they want you to know it too. Jesus didn't come to give the divine punishment. He came to take it on himself. Yes, Jesus came to this planet with punishment, with vengeance, and he took it on himself at the cross. So the untouchable doesn't have to. Guys, if I'm going to be honest with you, if someone saw every thought I ever had, everything I ever did, everything I ever said, thought about, and was in my heart, I'd be an untouchable. I know I've not always loved the people that God loves. I haven't always served the untouchables. I'm the untouchable. And this is not going to be a very nice thing. I don't know if I'll make friends by saying this, but so are you. We're all untouchables. If we're all honest with what's going on in our heart and what we think every day of our lives, we know that we're untouchable. We're the ones that deserve the punishment. Me, Simon Karel, I deserve the divine punishment that was coming. But when the bullet was on its way to hit me, Jesus stepped in the way and he took it on himself. He didn't come to give the punishment. He came to take it on the cross. You see, yes, Jesus served the untouchable, and this is almost a foreshadowing of when he's the ultimate servant on the cross. When the punishment was coming for you and for me, he stepped in the way and took it. But if he's taking the punishment, if he's taking it on himself, how are the enemies going to be destroyed? How are the people of the other political party going to be destroyed? How is my boss that's always shoving his values down my throat, how is he going to be destroyed? What about my neighbor that's driving me nuts and doesn't have the same values as me? Think about who you think of as untouchables in your life. People who aren't living a biblical lifestyle? I don't know what it is for you, but I know that all of us have people who we look at as untouchable. And God's not destroying them, but he promised he would bring the punishment. He promised he would bring the vengeance. He promised he would save me from my enemies. Where is it? Maybe, just maybe, your enemy's not people. Maybe it's the root of the problem as to why we're having all these issues. Maybe it's the root of the problem why people groups are hating on each other. Maybe it's the root of the problem why there's deafness and muteness and why there's all that pain and suffering. There's so much pain in our world. Why isn't God destroying it? The root of what this comes from is sin. You see, before there was sin in the world, human beings were in perfect relationship with each other. There wasn't people groups hating on each other. Before sin entered the world, there wasn't deafness, there wasn't mute. It was perfect. People in relationship with people and people in relationship with God. But when sin entered the world, it really messed it up. It messed it up so people are hating on each other, so there's pain and there's suffering. And the ultimate result of sin is death. Maybe the enemy that Jesus came to destroy was not people, it was death. You see, when Jesus came to take your sin and the divine punishment that you owe and that I owe, he took it on himself and he killed it at the cross. And then he buried it in the grave. And when all hope was lost, when the disciples had scattered, on that silent Sunday morning, 3 days later, Jesus' buried body began to breathe. The prophet Hosea describes it as a roaring lion, but Jesus rose from the dead, and he declared the grave has no claim over him. And if you believe in Jesus, the grave has no claim over you either. Jesus is the king over sin and death. If Jesus rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, what does that mean for today? Why does that matter to me today? I'm not a religious person. I'm not a church person. I'm not a Christian. Why does that matter to me? It matters because the servant King Jesus is our living hope for today. The ultimate servant Jesus gives hope for every relationship. Maybe your marriage is struggling. Maybe it feels like you're playing tug of war. One person come my way, no, you come my way, and it's struggling. Jesus laid his life down for the other person. Are you going to drop the rope for your spouse? Are you going to serve your spouse and bring hope to your marriage? It's no mystery that there's brokenness in Muskegon County. Some people have financial status, some people don't. What if we gave up some of our stuff and gave to people who don't have it? That would be living hope. That would matter for today. What about your boss that's driving you nuts? What if you just served him? What if you were silent, like Jesus was silent before the cross when he gave up his life for others? What if you did that for your boss? How different would it look? How different would Muskegon County be? But not just relationships, but it gives hope in the face of something that every single human being has to face: death. We just heard about a tragic event that happened in the life of our church. How can Jesus bring living hope into death? You see, death is not easy. If you have someone in your family, a loved one who's facing death right now, it's not easy. The self-proclaimed resurrection in the life of Jesus, when his friend died, Jesus bitterly wept at the grave of his friend. Death is terrible. It's not easy. It's not fun. But it does give hope. The same person who wept at the grave of his friend said, "If you believe in me, you will live even after you die." Jesus gives living hope in the face of death. It's not easy, but hope in Jesus gives you the ability to stare death straight in the face and say, "My King is greater, and he is the living hope for your life. He's the living hope for your workplace. He's the living hope for your home. He's the living hope for Muskegon County. He's the living hope for the world. Imagine how different Muskegon County would be if it was flooded with people who were serving the servant king, who were giving up their life for others. When going through tragedies, if they could stare death in the face and say, my king is greater. Jesus Christ is the living hope for today. Pray with me. Jesus, when I was an untouchable, you gave your life up for me. When I did not love the people who you love, you gave your life up for me. When I'm deserving of death, you conquered it. You're the king. There's nothing that is over you, Jesus. God, I pray for anyone in this room right now who has never placed their trust in you for their life after death. They've never placed themselves under your kingship. I pray they do that right now. They say, I'm so sorry for what I've done. I'm an untouchable. But you took my punishment and you conquered death. Jesus, you are the living hope. Because of you, the grave has no claim on me and no claim on any person in this room who believes in you. Jesus, in your name I pray. Amen.